Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way Through. I am your host, Bonnie Worth, where we tune in every single week with me to explore the mind body spirit connection through the lens of mediumship, metaphysics, and of course, conscious co creation to navigate the challenges in life, to unravel our conditioning and discover a relationship with life that we can really, alter, shift, change, and fall in love with. That's ultimately, why we're here every single week. It's basically, how are we interacting with the relationship of our life? When today I'm really excited because I'm so fortunate to have a good friend and expert on the show here with me today to talk about stress and burnout and all of these multi layers or the complexity of what we go through. Stress and burnout are increasingly prevalent in our society, and it impacts all of us. It doesn't matter, whether it has to do with work, relationships, our personal well-being, and it is deeply influenced by our underlying wounding, the inherited conditioning. It can create a real complexity or interplay that affects how we cope, how we show up in our lives, how we manage our mental health, our emotional health, and our commitment to staying the course on our healing journey. Today, as I shared, I have a special guest, and of course, you're seeing her, Dr. Mallory Ryan. Dr. Mal is on a mission to help women unlock the biology of sustained energy, the resilience, high performance by harnessing the power of the nervous system and, of course, our hormonal patterns. Her approach delves into our inherent power, the strength of the female body, while emphasizing the optimal ways to support it. She brings wisdom, levity, and empowerment to a global phenomena of burnout and the complexity of women's hormones with simple, high value, women specific strategies for sustainable transformation. Dr. Mel, welcome, welcome, welcome to The Way Through. I'm so grateful to have you here on today's show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I just like you mentioned, we're good friends. So any day that I get to talk and have a chat with you about all the things that we're interested in and fascinated by is a good day. So thank you for having
Yeah, you bet. You bet. So I'm really, when we look at this, of course, in what is your perspective and the work that you're doing, you really help women to really, discover more about themselves underneath. Even though you're coming in from a functional medicine perspective, you're also really helping so many women delve into their wounding, their traumas, how they're coping and managing with stress, their burnout from day to day, life. I'm really curious, just as we introduce you to the listeners here this morning, how did you get into this work?
me. It's interesting, and I guess it ultimately does come down to by accident. But when I was younger, and this is where I can really pinpoint my fascination with the nervous system and how we have influence over our own experience quite a bit. When I was young, I was about 5 or 6, I woke up one morning and there was a lot of panic around. I was having a seizure. And fast forward to several hours, and we landed at the children's hospital. And while I was there, everyone was calling me by my middle name. Everyone was saying, Danette, Danette, Danette. They were just mentioning my middle name. And I was so confused as to, one, why everyone was so scared, and two, why everyone was calling me by my middle name. And so it eventually came out that day that my mother had a sister who passed away at 20 years old, and they didn't know why. All she had was childhood seizures.
Oh,
And so that fear that was around me, and so it was this idea that every time it would happen, it would be out of my control, and I have to be scared. And there was a doctor, a female physician. And when you're so small, everyone's kind of talking around you, a
yeah.
female physician, and she knelt down and she said, every single one will go away. It will all pass. You don't have to be scared. And it opened up this idea of I actually can perceive it in a different way. And I remember my next seizure, it was only about maybe a couple weeks later, and I was on my bike and I laid down and I just watched a dandelion on the grass. And then I had no fear. And it always fascinated me. I was only young. I didn't make the connection then, but it always fascinated me that we can have a similar experience, situation, and different experiences based on our perception, based on the information that we have. And so my first degree in neuroscience and psychology was all about how do we tap into a little bit more of that understanding and how we operate, what safety means, what's the nervous system. And then from a functional medicine perspective, stress in our own experience of stress is a physiological experience. It's a hormone. And so I guess when you add it all up and stack it all up, it was that reflection on that profound experience of understanding what is only is because of how we see it.
Oh, wow, I love that. I love that so much because it's where we understand our, as you said, our perspective, our understanding of things are based on what we know to believe or believe to be true. And once we begin to challenge, is this true? Is
Mhm.
how I think about myself, are the effects of, how I've been perceiving my life, is it truth? And when we start to peel back those layers, we start to realize like there's more to the story. There's more possibility. And again, what we need to shift and alter in order to move through that. I'm really curious here as well. When we look at, I mentioned at the start of the show, how in today's society, it really doesn't matter whether it's relationship or work or it's family or it's our personal well-being, even for those individuals who are on, very committed into their healing journey, that stress and burnout are very prevalent, and they're primary factors for a lot of people. Why do you think this is? Like, what has happened to us as a society or as a people that this is a function for us?
Mhm. I think in some respects, the system, very much so, the modern design of our society and the system itself, in some respects, is kind of rigged against the nervous system.
Mhm.
We have access to so much information. We have access to social comparison on a global scale. We have access to some of the most horrendous things that are happening globally. And it can feel as though we're under a constant state of fear and threat, when the reality of where we are right now in this moment in our home in this situation may not actually be true to that constant state of fear. And so I think that what we have access to, social pressures, conditioning, social media, and when you lean that against how we're designed to hold on to negative information via the brain. We're designed to have this deep sense of belonging into groups and communities. We're designed to want to fit in, and therefore, so that we belong to the community. Um, and so I think when you look at it from the 30,000-foot view of how modern society has created itself to be this open vessel to access all this information, to access everybody, and to not know what's true or not through social media. Um, when you compare that to how we're actually designed, it actually can create such a crippling situation where we don't know how to turn off anymore. We don't know how to operate in the way the system's designed, which is a system that's designed to protect you as needed and rest as needed.
Mhm.
And so when we're constantly receiving that feedback to be on and input to be on, there's no time for rest. And so over time, that resources dwindle, and we end up feeling as though our baseline is running on fumes and our
Mhm.
baseline is overwhelmed. And it's not that the system is broken, the inherent system is broken, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's just a lot of the input is overwhelming.
Yeah. And I think, thank you so much. I love how you really, explain that. The other thing that comes up as I'm listening to you talk is really, we have this cyclical nature that takes place, and it's cyclical in terms of, yes, maybe in our own lives of these reoccurring patterns. That's one thing I love about you in the work that you do is you recognize patterns so quickly. But where we look at these behavioral patterns or what leads us to experiencing stress and burnout in our lives. But I talk a lot on the show as well in terms of that internalized pressure where we look at coping, but but in a way that it's difficult for us to actually articulate our feelings, and our feelings then become almost complex or compounded in terms of some of those stressors, where we're not able to fully express how we feel, how we're what we're experiencing, again, whether that be based on the fact that, it's been deemed, as stress or burnout. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody is, maybe they're carrying shame over the fact that they're not able to manage or handle things, and that internal pressure becomes really difficult, where effective coping mechanisms really fall to the wayside.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
We tend to wear um, masks that feel unsustainable to the point where your system is almost trying to create a breaking point.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, even when we look at, some of the unhealthy, where we look at, this is where we get into overworking ourselves,
Mhm.
the self-sacrifice, or maybe even avoidance of things as well, where we're avoiding maybe our commitments, or even people in our relationships, simply because where those levels are rising inside of us, and
Mhm.
it's increasing a sense of maybe inadequacy, or a sense
Mhm.
of I love how you said earlier too, the increased negative or criticism within our own thoughts and beliefs about ourselves as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, let's I really what let's talk about the nervous system, because you've mentioned, of course, everyone's familiar with the fact that we have a nervous system, but let's talk about it in terms of regulation, in terms of what is the nervous system, and how do we regulate it when we get into these stressful times, or when we're feeling just overwhelmed by life.
Mhm. So the nervous system is a hormonal system. You can think of the stress system. The nervous system is a hormonal system that is designed to protect us. It is designed to the currency of the nervous system is safety. It is always designed to create a state of safety for you. And so under stress and the nervous system tend to get a name that it's negative, or it's something that's meant to be um, coddled, or it's delicate, or it's glass like. You have to protect it and you really have to nurture it. The nervous system is incredibly resilient. It's designed resilient. It's designed with an incredible amount of capacity and stamina and staying power. And so stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. And I tell individuals all the time, like, stress is the hormone that allows us to be sitting upright and having some level of attentiveness is stress hormone. The hormone that turns off sleep hormone overnight is stress hormone. And so stress is applying pressure to our lives, whether that's good or bad. And so stress in and of itself is the very friction that we use to shape ourselves, to shape our identities, to make decisions, to propel ourselves forward. The very fact that we've evolved to the capacity of being able to have such high order thinking and complicated relationships and complex thinking is the very natures that we had to adapt to stress. We had to evolve against stress. And so stress in and of itself is a wonderful, beautiful thing. It's not a negative thing. It is the pressure that we feel, whether that's positive or negative. The nervous system in and of itself is the container with which that happens. And now the nervous system operates off of safety. It operates off of, it's an ally. Is this good? Is this safe? Should I proceed? And so the interesting thing is that the interconnection with the nervous system and the brain is that the only information that it knows is what it's been through. It's the past. It holds that Rolodex of all of our experiences. And so past hurt tends to project into future fear. And so we protect. And we often have this idea that in order to regulate, or in order to not be stressed, we must be calm. We must be, everything must be okay, or we must develop the ability to override our instincts or our emotional instincts and be calm. And I think the interesting thing about the nervous system, from my perspective, is that the nervous system often doesn't call for us to be calm. It calls for us to increase our capacity and increase our ability to hold. And sometimes, oftentimes, it's not what we're doing or what's happening on the outside of us. We always say, I'm so stressed because of this, that, or the other thing that's occurring outside of us, or this happened, or this person said this. Your experience of stress is not what occurs outside of an emergency, which is very reflexive. Our experience of stress is not what it's occurring. It's what we're saying it means. And that is the huge component, because the nervous system in and of itself is a blind system. We are giving it information all the time. So 100 individuals can be experiencing the same situation and have 100 different reactions. And that just proves the point that the nervous system is taking your word for it, whether you believe it or not. And some of those words are adopted from past experiences. Some of those words have been words that were told to us in a very negative manner. We've been punished in a way that it becomes our inner voice. And some of those words are something that we call our own identity, which means we believe it so deeply that we never check it. It's just who we are. And so that becomes the very rule book which the nervous system operates by. And we forget that we're the ones that write the rules. If I spend any appreciable time right now describing a lemon, we could have your body salivate. And that simple fact alone proves the point that there's no lemon. So what else does it believe to be true?
Yeah.
If we can have a physiological response. And so the interesting thing in the work that I do, it's not a matter of controlling everything in your environment or increasing your ability to suppress and remain calm. It's more about how do we actually understand the relationship that we have with our own system and understand that we are giving consistent daily, minute by minute information to our own systems if we're safe or not. And how do we use those ways to influence it while building our capacity for taking on situations that feel good and not threatening, for emotionally regulating through situations that we used to cause us a lot of pain, but now we have bigger, broader, wider, open space within us to hold space for that and open up that capacity rather than our reflex to try and control everything in our environment or put it in the future. I'll relax once this quarter's over, once this project's done, once I lose this weight, when da 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 da. And so the nervous system can't hold its breath that long to regulate anymore. It can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness, Mel. This is where again we look at. You mentioned here this to regulate the nervous system, and so when we look at how when we've been under not only stress, but say for those individuals who've experienced a lot of trauma in their life, there's a lot of underlining wounding that it becomes, that feeling of safety in the world has been basically negated, and it's really difficult to establish what is a sense of safety when you're trying to move forward in the life, or maybe if you feel like whether you've been abused or there's been a lot, massive losses, whether there's been abandonment, neglect, all of those things, we tend to not feel safe. And I say we because those are part of my story. So in that it's really difficult to establish what is that sense of safety in our lives, or a sense of even worthiness, of course. What do you recommend to people, when you look at they're moving through, they tune in, of course, to this program because they're moving through their healing journey. They're looking at, how do I regulate? How do I find that sense of calm? And I think it's important, as you said, that it's not about establishing the calm. This is about really moving through the many layers and complexities of the experiences, but also recognizing that we're already built in the structural and physical aspect of the resilience, and those feelings, those thoughts, the behaviors are all impacting. The body is listening, the body is responding to everything that's going on internally for us. So what do you recommend to people who are looking and saying, I don't know what it's like to be safe in the world? What do you have
Mhm.
to say to them?
I think there's a very strong value also to recognizing. I I think we can be incredibly self-critical and feel as though we're doing it wrong, or it's not where we're supposed to be, or it's nothing's working, which inherently means that there's a problem. But I think when we really reach back to those moments where you felt unsafe, it's oftentimes not associated with today, a Friday, November something something, that we're not safe right now. It's it's that remnant of I wasn't safe, but I really wasn't safe. And when I had my guard down, I was hurt. And when I least expected it came pain. And it wasn't predictable. And so, one thing that I think I have a lot of reverence for is that people create coping strategies. For instance, if you grew up in an environment when you were younger that had a lot of chaos and unpredictability, you likely became an individual that became incredibly emotionally intelligent, where you can walk in a room and you can look at someone's facial expression and get a sense immediately how to respond. You became very good at scanning and understanding how I can influence that individual's emotional needs right now. How can I meet their emotional needs in order for my needs to be met? And oftentimes, the need in and of itself is just to feel safe and to feel in control and to feel certain. And so some of these coping strategies that we develop at a very fundamental level was survival when we were younger. It's how we were able to adapt to the environment that we were in. And I think having a lot of reverence for how intelligent the nervous system is and how intelligent the body is to adapt and create tactics and strategies, and the ability to people please, the ability to emotionally scan, the ability to understand and meet other people's needs before your own, the ability to know whether you should do something, whether you should go out of your room or not because of how heavy footsteps are outside. Those are all allowable. Those are able to be done via the nervous system. And so when we grow up and when we become adults, it's still the blueprint that we've adopted as a young child as to who we had to be to receive the level of reward and level of peace and safety that we required. And oftentimes what happens is we sometimes collapse people pleasing, that ability to emotionally regulate, that feeling that I'm just someone that puts other people's needs before my own every single time, as part of our identity. And the problem with it being part of our identity is that it feels as though there's a permanence to it. It's how it has to be. And therefore, this is who I am, and I want to figure out a way to feel better in the confines and container of this being who I am. And I think sometimes it's refreshing to say, but is that really who I am?
Yeah.
Is that really who I am? Or is that
Yeah.
who I had to be? And
Mhm.
the reflection of, if it's something that I've adapted by choice and by necessity when you were younger, do I still have the choice to adapt? And the difference between who you had to be and who you choose to be now, there's a lot of discomfort. And I think the discomfort is often interpreted as stop.
Mhm.
This isn't familiar. And I think this is scary or threatening. And I think that when we start to make choices for ourselves, and it doesn't have to be huge, it could be as simple as I feel something, and you stop and be like, what is that?
Mhm.
Rather than carry on,
Right.
swallow it down. Or, um, I make everybody else's meal and I always eat standing up. Or it always is 6 p.m. before I even have my first glass of water.
Yeah.
Those simple moments, and I know they seem small and insignificant, but the closest thing to our emotional world is our behavioral world. We don't have to understand it on a logical level all the time to just make different choices consistently. And the difference I would like to share is that you know you're in the right direction if it's incredibly uncomfortable. The nervous system
Yes.
is not threat. The truth is it's just unfamiliar.
Mhm.
It's just foreign. And so sometimes it's navigating the discomfort of making these small changes for ourselves in these micro moments and having a lot of compassion and having a lot of reverence for the little one that was able to adapt in uncertainty and chaos
Mhm.
and craft a self that was able to, I don't want to say thrive, but sustain.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that level of sustenance isn't working anymore when you compound responsibility and life. And when it continues to stack, it becomes incredibly heavy. And so understanding that identity, the nervous system, our decisions and choices, how we take care of ourselves are
Mhm.
not black and white. It's an evolving, ever going daily conversation with ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so, like, honestly, thank you, because this is exactly it. I always say one, when I look back and it's like we don't even realize we have a choice. We're so conditioned, we're so primal in survival that we don't even realize there's any other choices we can make, or the choices to even put ourselves into priority, to say, I'm going to sit down and have the meal. I'm going to make sure that I have a glass of water as the first thing, every day when I wake up. All of these things, and how we care for ourselves and really anoint ourselves as being worthy in the whole dynamic, after having lived through, whether, again, it's this is whether it's about childhood, whether it's in adolescence, whether it's even in our adult life where we're experiencing our the depths of our greatest wounding. It's about recentering inside of ourselves and remembering that,
Mhm,
one, we have a choice, and remembering that we can alter and experience life in a different way. I love what you said, though. Is it really our truth, and is that really who I am underneath all of the layers, all the conditioning, all of these behaviors, all of these thoughts I've had? Is that really who I am?
mhm,
And it's amazing how programmed we are to sustain the old identity, or that illusion of self,
mhm,
until we begin to question,
mhm,
and take a look at not just the things that have happened to us, but take a look at who we are in the mix of everything. And I think that becomes such an ultimate and important piece of what helps and supports us on our healing journey. I also want to acknowledge, I want to say thank you, because you just spoke to every empath that tunes in. I mean, this show, I have a lot of individuals who tune in week after week who are highly sensitive, emotional, current, and what you talk about, of the vigilance that begins, the scanning of the room, the looking for, how, when I walk into this room, where's my safety? What's going on? How do I please and placate and attend
mhm,
to the needs of others, just to create that sense of safety in this moment? And
mhm,
it becomes, that in and of itself is stressful. It's an undercurrent, and we
mhm,
don't even realize it's there. It's an unconscious stress factor that even can make it even more challenging for us to, function and to have that positive mindset. But it can be very, I know, like, even for myself, just, it became this, it's like almost a state of codependency,
mhm,
where everyone else's needs are more important, and keeping that network of safety,
mhm,
even in an unsafe situation, is the not only the priority, but becomes the focus. And so it becomes, here again, where we begin to neglect, dismiss, or even put ourselves into situations that may not otherwise be healthy for us.
mhm. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and I think that taps into not only the conditioning with how we were treated and how everyone behaved around us, but also that emotional regulation conditioning that we often face,
Mhm.
and the idea that we, as society and different sort of family units, can really teach us that we have to suppress who we really are. We have to craft ourselves in a way that's
Yeah.
acceptable. And then we are allowed to express emotions that are palatable, happiness, contentment, joy, and we have to fix ones that aren't.
Yeah.
Which means that if I walk into a room and I felt as though I was familiar with someone when I was younger with that was incredibly angry, I've adapted coping mechanisms to handle people's micro expressions of anger, and I can palliate that possible experience, which ultimately means that my safety is associated with I can't tolerate that anger. I have to fix it. I don't have the capacity to have it and experience it and integrate it. It has to be fixed. It has to go away.
Mhm.
I'm not allowed.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's deep, deep programming. That's the, that can even be until we're again, I always say awareness. Once we become aware of something, we're like, 50 over halfway there in being able to shift and change and alter it for ourselves. But it's until the awareness is there because it happens at such a programmed aspect of of our conditioning. And I want to say, it's not where I come on every week or, even in this conversation, it's not about looking back and pointing fingers at, our parents in blame, but it's understanding that, as children, those are the most formidable years in terms of our understanding of who we are and what we believe about ourselves, what we understand the world to be. And when we don't have the necessarily, we could say, the role models even for handling stress. So even if we've been a child of of a parent who was always stressed out, always overtaxed, always, to the extreme of it, we then become very conditioned to the same habits and the same ways that our parents handled stress. Like it's a part of what becomes the cyclical nature through generations. We can look at it, of what's inherited becomes not just what we've taken on from the external world, but what we're carrying with us based on the
Mhm.
behaviors and influences of those around us.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. It's not about pointing fingers because you can just continuously go down generation to generate. Like, when does
Right.
it stop?
Yeah. Right.
And 99% of the time, I really like to believe that people and parents are doing the best that they can
I
with the
me too.
information that they have at the level that
Agreed.
they're at.
Agreed.
And that that's where that term comes from. When you actively start to become aware of these things, you really do break a cycle.
Yeah.
You really do break a chain of behaviors and a chain of believing and a chain of how you operate in the world, which can break these generational cycles.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing, amazing. So I know, I mean, I could talk to you, forever on this subject because there's so many, directions we could always take the conversation and really dive in even deeper. But I just, really, I'm wondering what recommendations you have for people who are looking to learn how to self-regulate, are looking to understand one, not just the fact that they are worthy, or to understand the fact that they do have a choice, or to understand the fact that they have this power and resilience inside of them to shift, alter, and enact in their life in a different way than what was previously designed. What recommendations do you have for them, and how do they begin to honor not just the emotion but to regulate in the mix of that?
Mhm. I think there's a few different things that would be helpful. One thing, I think in general, we tend to have a very um, limited emotional literacy. So it's I'm upset
Yes.
or I'm angry. And I think having that identity, first of all, emotions, and I didn't find this was like 10 years into postgraduate, like Emotions are felt as symptoms in the body. And I think that's an interesting thing. We often are trying to make sense of everything on a very logical place. But when we talk about the nervous system, when we talk about the brain, logic has a very weak positioning. Very weak positioning. About 5% of our ability of the brain is to really capture logic and use it. When we talk about emotions, emotions have our very deep subconscious patterns that we have. And they're felt as not thoughts in the mind, but they're felt as symptoms in the body, which is why we have that universal language, and facial expressions can be, and body language is so important. Globally, it's because we could describe someone with heat in their face and clenched fists and be like, okay, they're angry. Or we can describe someone with like downward shoulders and their head, they're weighting their head and they are sighing, they're sad. And so I think, one, there's that component of being curious. I always share with individuals, I love the idea of being curious rather than expecting, just relinquishing the idea for a moment that you're a problem to fix and you're something to explore. In and of itself
Yeah.
is freeing and the truth. And so starting to see some patterns. And if you have a hard time identifying the symptom, follow your reactions. Those reflexive, like, oh, that makes me so upset. And then afterward be like, what happened before? What was I feeling before? When I get a pit in my stomach, or when I reflexively respond to an email and try to make everything okay, or when I really lash out, it's actually I feel really helpless, or I have a really hard time when I'm feeling vulnerable. And so expanding our vocabulary and identifying those symptoms that we experience, is it sadness? Is it frustration? Is it anger? Is it vulnerability or shame or embarrassment or disappointment? And really highlighting that I'm good or bad, or I'm anxious. Anxiety is not, it's not
Right.
applying because it's an umbrella term. It's like IBS. It's
Yes,
just
right.
generalized umbrella term that's not
Yeah.
specific.
Yeah.
And so when you give emotions language, like if you've ever been around a child and they were crying and you just kneel down, you're like, you're really sad.
Yeah.
There's a soothing component to that because your nervous system is designed to throw out flares, red flags, something's wrong. And when you say, I'm just feeling really vulnerable, it's like there's a coherence between that logical and emotional parts of the brain. So understanding some of the patterns of emotions. And then if you have a hard time identifying the symptoms of the emotions, follow your behaviors. What seems so reflexive that it's often something that you have to look back on in retrospect versus in the moment,
Yes.
and then follow the symptoms and name it. I'm feeling helpless. And the ultimate goal is to get to a place where you're allowed. You're
Yes.
allowed to. Even if for decades you weren't, and even if your safety was connected to you suppressing your anger, suppressing your sadness, not showing vulnerability, not showing helplessness, putting on this facade that everything's perfect and everything's fine, you're still human and you're allowed. And you're never going to avoid the messiness of being human. And
Right.
the nervous system has to tonify and deal with and spend a significant amount of energy and time dealing internally what we don't allow ourselves to process or express externally. And so sometimes the biggest emotional energy drain that we have is just trying to hold it all in, just trying to hold it in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that creates a very friction that we have to manufacture a life that feels good. And I suspect that overwhelm is when the conveyor belt's going too fast and you can't capture it all.
Right.
And
Right.
so you just start to open up your emotional literacy, observe, explore, play rather than expect. And you don't have to fix it. Just become curious by it. Everybody is
Right.
operating via patterns. Like, what are
Yeah.
my patterns? Where do I stop? Why don't I ask for help? Why is this so hard for me to do?
Mhm.
And then it will give you the breadcrumbs. And then when you find the final breadcrumb, you sit and you make the space for it to just exist. You just sit with that symptom and you feel it and you allow it and you turn it up and you sit and you cry and you scream or whatever you're going to do. But it's basically reaching back to the little person that was scared and saying, we're good. We're okay. We can hold it all. You're allowed.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that releases the pressure valve on the nervous system from trying to manufacture a state of safety, not just today, but from a compilation of every day and every year and every decade that has occurred before that, where you, one, weren't okay, but then two, you weren't allowed to not be okay.
Right. Right.
And
Oh
that
my.
can allow some extra space. And then it also reminds your nervous system, I actually make the rules.
Mhm.
It's okay to be uncertain. It's okay that we have no idea what's going to happen. It's okay to say I don't know to an answer. It's
Right.
okay but there's enough space in here to allow frustration and anger and feeling helpless and vulnerable. Because once we allow it, the only real access to true information is once we get beyond the emotional experience. What does this mean? What do I want to do? Do I need to express myself? Do I want to share this information? Is this helping me navigate a certain situation? And it just gives you information.
Mhm. Mhm. It's beautiful. And I want to say thank you because this is exactly, as I said, when I first started out on my healing journey, I only knew that there were two emotions. There was happy or sad. And I
Right.
knew I wasn't happy. So I just knew I was sad. Like it was like that vocabulary is such an important piece of it because to be so cut off from what we're in the experience of what's coming up for us, what it is that's actually going on deep behind the scenes of our own psyche is such an important piece of this because we need to be able to, in order to self regulate, we need to self identify. We need
Mhm.
to self identify in terms of what's going on, how we're feeling. Putting words to it is such a powerful piece. And I love how you shared how it becomes the medicine for the nervous system. It's like the nervous system goes into
Mhm.
relax mode, it goes into ease the moment we can identify and we can articulate what it is that's going on. But I
Mhm.
think, you touched on this as well, that we've never maybe had permission to do that, or we've been believed that it was wrong. Like I can think back to the number of times where I was told, you're too sensitive, like you're too sensitive, and as if that's something that was bad or wrong. But it
Mhm.
is understanding it is a sensitivity that we all have, and
Mhm.
our and honoring the emotions that come up and becoming curious. I think curiosity is such a I mean, we're such benefactors from curiosity because it gives us the opportunity to explore who we are and in what makes us tick and what we truly believe and how it is that we feel about certain things and being able to identify those key things is such an instrumental and important part of our ability to move forward beyond what happened to us in our past and beyond the narratives and the stories, because now we get to create a new story. We get to have, a new identity, so to speak,
Yeah.
something that's come forward underneath, all of the multi layers again of who we've always thought we were to be.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think it really speaks to the fact that your nervous system isn't waiting for you to fix it all. It's waiting
Right.
for you to say it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I just have one of the listeners here that I want to just acknowledge because they bring out something here. It always says easier said than done. Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. It is because it is in the moment because we're so taxed, we're so overwhelmed, we're
Mhm.
so caught up in what is happening in that moment. It can be very difficult to
Right.
be able to find that. And
Mhm.
even moving into the healing journey itself or overcoming is exactly because we seem like we keep being put back into the old information or put back into the old emotion or into the old paradigm that's operating. And it can be a very challenging aspect of
Yes.
our road to recovery as well.
Mhm. And I
Yeah.
think that's a strong point to highlight too, is that healing and recovery and emotional regulation and sort of evolving your identity and adapting your coping strategies is brutal.
Mhm.
It's incredibly difficult, it's incredibly messy, and
Yeah.
I think it's why it's it's very difficult to approach, and I think if it that's why it's very few are seeking. I know a lot of your listeners, they're on this journey, and it's the journey that they're choosing that's actually the hard path.
Yeah.
Very fulfilling, but it is incredibly difficult, and it's not about fixing it all, it's these micro moments.
Mhm.
It's just showing the nervous system, it's just showing your internal system that there's another option.
Yeah. I
And
love
this
how you say it's a micro moment because it's a micro moment that gives us this opportunity to extend grace and compassion towards ourselves.
Mhm,
This grace, this little one, as we said, we look at this one that's inside of us. And when we look at being able to offer just the compassion for ourselves, the one who's endured everything, just
mhm,
the grace, the love, and the patience in for ourselves in our recovery as well is such an important piece. We don't get through this overnight. This isn't a one size, one step process. There are many steps to this process there, and there are many processes within each of the steps as well. And it's just about, I think more than anything is just looking at how do we move beyond just simply that survival scope of it so that we can move more into a place where we can begin to cultivate a sense of ease and maybe a sense of fulfillment even in our lives as well. It's
mhm.
such a yeah, I just really, I mean, it is I just go back to that because it's so much easier said than done, but we have to understand that we are so worthy
Mhm,
of the reward that comes as the from the willingness to commit to doing this, to do the deeper work, to be with who we are, to understand who we are, and to be with how we feel,
mhm.
and to be able to articulate that, to be able to express it instead of keeping it held and bound inside of us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I could talk to you, of course, forever about this. This is such a great conversation, and which just means I'm going to have you back on the show, 'cause so we can, continue and dive into all aspects of this. I'm going to say thank you so much, for coming in and sharing your wisdom here today. For those of you who are tuning in as well, if you'd like to reach out to Dr. Mel for, support, help on your journey, of course, please feel free to reach out to her. Your website, Mel, if you want to share that with everyone, and
Yes.
yeah.
It's revereco.ca. I think they popped it up
Yeah,
there.
there we go. Perfect. Yes.
Yeah, so my work, it stacks from the stress nervous system up to hormones. And so
Mhm.
the stress component, cortisol, and our stress hormone is really the foundation, and then how your body responds, that hormonal imprint is
Yeah.
on the other end.
Yeah, so great, so great. So just in the last few words here, I think, before we close our time together, I think, looking at this relationship to who we are, the relationship to what is possible is all about what's going on inside of us. And I think you said that beautifully, that, where we look at what is perpetuating it and becoming curious and being adaptive in our own opportunity to choose for ourselves, adaptive in being able to you know say no to situations that are no longer in alignment for us, and being able to honor ourselves wherever we are on this journey, and giving ourselves that sense of unconditional love. I think the saying, or the quote, we more than anyone deserve our own love and affection,
Mhm.
and this is really what this journey comes down to.
Absolutely, I couldn't
Yeah,
have said.
yeah. Any final words for listeners here today before we close? Anything you'd like to share?
I think knowing you and knowing your listeners and knowing um, how difficult this journey is, it's it's worth it, and I think it's an incredibly brave endeavor to continue to choose a path forward that feels better than what may have felt in the past. And although a lot of these tips and strategies may be simplistic on the surface, they are certainly not easy.
Right.
And the good news about the nervous system is that it's always listening. So even the moments where you choose a different, even the moments where you take space to allow how you feel, and the moments that you choose to not self-abandon reflexively or focus on everyone else's needs, those micro moments stack to create a spectrum of possibility rather than just a conditioned way of operating.
Mhm.
And that is ultimately the goal, and it gets stronger and stronger. But it's incredibly uncomfortable. And I think even recognizing this is the hard part.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's, and I get my kids to say that when they want to stop something. Is this the hard part? Yeah, this is the hard part. Did you think it'd be easy? No, this is the hard part.
This is
You're
the
doing
hard
it. We're going through it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Oh my gosh, beautiful and brilliant. Thank you so very much again,
Here.
Dr. Mel, for coming on to the show and having this conversation. Of course, to everyone who is tuning in today, truly appreciate you being here. If there's something that was really stood out for you on today's episode, by all means, please comment. Please let me know. Reach out through all the multi different forums and different places that you can get in. That you can connect with me. If this is an episode that you feel someone in your life may benefit from, I really want to encourage you to look at sharing this and allowing for this work, this wisdom to help and support those that you love as well. So thank you everyone for tuning in and remembering there is always, always a way through, irregardless of what might be happening or what you might believe is possible for you. All right, everyone, God bless. And until next time, bye-bye.